So join the march, stomp those feet, swing that club to the ogre beat. That one was free, but if you want more songs, it'll cost you. An ogre's gotta eat after all. I accept most forms of currency. Gold pieces, the pretty rocks.
Drongo, do you like semi-irradiated scrap? Yeah, me too.
Come on! Hey, buddy!
Oh yeah, straight from the chem wastes.
Grox! Hey, when are you gonna introduce me to your grandmother?
I'm gonna die soon.
No! For grandmother!
5 minutes later.
Say, it got kinda quiet around here. Yeah, I never did like the quiet. It makes you start thinking about past choices, and nobody wants that.
Greetings, Narbash. It is I, your trusty guide on becoming not just a good, but the best support you could ever imagine in Predecessor. Are you ready to embark on this treacherous...
Oh my god, sorry about him. Anyway, I'm here to tell you everything you need to know from buffing allies to boofing enemies. By the end of this video, you'll know how to navigate the darkest of jungles and the most dangerous of lanes as we explore every nook and cranny of being an S-tier support for your team in Predecessor. I've been noticing a lot of newer players picking up the support role after getting into Predecessor, which is great because I think it's the most beginner-friendly role, but I've also been noticing a lot of easily avoidable mistakes. While it may not be the flashiest role, supports play a huge part on your team by providing, as the name implies, support for your team in fights by either locking down certain enemy heroes or by buffing and healing your own allies. And if worse comes to worse, dying for your teammates so they can get out alive by making the most valiant of sacrifices by attempting to lead the enemy heroes away on a wild goose chase. I've had countless games as a support that have been won and lost because I landed or in most cases missed a critical stun, but we don't talk about that. So to all the support mains out there that have been taking one for the team, game after game,
I see you. I see you.
now grab your carry and get ready to experience. So jumping into part 1, and your main responsibility as a support, at the very top of the list we have keeping your ADC alive at all costs, as they're going to be the most powerful hero but need consistent and reliable farm to reach power levels above the coveted 9,000 threshold. Because of their very high damage though, ADCs also have the lowest health pools and typically have little utility with their kit to help them stay alive, which is where you come in as the support. Every decision you make should revolve around keeping him alive. Think of it as you're the Secret Service and they're the president. The best way to do this is by strategically using your utility as the support character to either create or shut down moves from yourself and your opponent. What I mean by this is, let's say you're playing a Decker with a Revenant ADC against Richter and Drongo. Richter's very scary to play against in the support role because of his hook ability. Traditionally, Richter also has an advantage for the majority of the game in being able to dictate when fights happen by pulling his opponents in. So as a Decker, you'll mostly be waiting for Richter to try and engage with the hook, and if he manages to land it, try and immediately use your stun ball to shut him down so your carry can escape with minimal damage. You can also stun the carry if you're in a better position. This might be more ideal in most situations because they're the ones that are going to deal more damage. Either way, just stun someone ASAP. This will disrupt their play, and most of the time will be enough to save your carry from taking a ton of damage and having to back, or even worse, letting the enemy duo get a kill and assist. If you're both on comms or the same mental telepath network, you could also retaliate on the enemy duo in that situation, since they now have their best abilities on cooldown for the next 10 to 15 seconds. So to quickly recap this first part, make sure you're saving your most important abilities like your stun, shield, or movement speed buffs for times when they're most necessary and your carry's in danger. I see so many supports that will take like Narbash in the lane and just spam his thunk whenever it's off cooldown. This is a pretty terrible idea though, because unless you have your carry ready to follow up, the majority of the time it's going to give the enemy duo a chance to seriously retaliate since your abilities will be on cooldown. And moving along to part 2, we're going to talk about the early game poking and keeping vision advantage with wards. I mentioned before how it's important to save your high utility items for strategic purposes, but there are also some support heroes who have a few less useful items for keeping your carry alive and are good for poking your lane opponent. An example of these are Decker and Muriel's primary abilities. These both don't offer much utility besides a short slow, but deal pretty respectable damage, so if you're decent at landing these abilities, you should be using them to poke your opponents. Just be mindful that, especially in the early game, when you attack your opponent in lane, the enemy minions are going to start aggroing you. And they do deal a hefty amount of damage in the first 5 to 10 minutes, so be cautious. One small tip regarding this is that you can pick up a little extra physical armor as your starting item when leaving the fountain. This will reduce the amount of damage you take from both the minions and the hero's auto attacks. Moving on to another one of your primary responsibilities as a support, this is going to be keeping vision advantage on the map whenever possible. On average, you should be placing twice as many wards as the rest of your team over the course of a game. You start with the same 2 stealth wards as everyone else on a 170-second cooldown, but once you upgrade your support crest, which I'll cover in the itemization part, you'll then be granted a total of 3 wards every time you back to the fountain. This will mean you have the biggest vision responsibility on your team to make sure you're placing them well and often, so you're able to keep tab on where the enemy team is, helping you to prevent ganks or surprise objective plays. Here's some of the most common spots you should be warding as a support in the early to mid game. Once you head into the late game, you should be roaming the map, grouped up with your fellow teammates, and extending the ward area to these. Once you have the upgraded ward, not only will you be able to see where the enemies are in relation to it, but they'll also reveal any hidden wards placed by the enemy, allowing you to destroy them, giving you a much bigger vision advantage on that part of the map. You can place wards here to help gauge what the jungler is up to. This will tell you if they're actively clearing their camps or potentially making a gank rotation. Here, because the jungle rivers are the most commonly traveled areas and can alert you to both jungle and mid lane gank attempts, as well as if the enemy is potentially setting up for a Fangtooth or Orb Prime play. And lastly here, if your team's getting dunked on and the enemy team has near free reign on your own jungle, this will help your team make safer plays and not give the enemy any more kills, which is essential in that type of situation. Moving on to part 3, where I'll be discussing when to rotate, when it's okay to push your lane, and how to back efficiently to maximize your XP gain. As for when it's a good time to rotate, for the most part, you don't want to take too much time away from the lane whenever possible, as naturally, over the course of the game, you'll be the most underleveled hero on the team. The longer you spend away from lane, the less XP you're going to be able to soak up, either passively with your carry, or fully by securing minion hits whenever they have to back. This means only secure the last hits though. If you hard push the lane into the enemy, not only will you lose the lane advantage by having to push farther down into the enemy lane to secure last hits with your ADC, but you'll also leave yourself a lot more susceptible to ganks. This means, ideally when you see your carry start backing, instead of backing with them, which is a popular strategy, stay in lane until he gets back. Then send him a few careful duo, be right back pings, and go back yourself. This will allow both you and your carry to soak up a little more XP than if you were splitting it between the two of you. That way, as well, none of the XP from the minions dying while no one is in lane goes to waste, therefore ensuring maximum profit. Once the laning phase starts to come to an end, around the 20 to 30 minute mark, this is the time where you also want to start moving around the whole map more, while always making sure to keep important areas warded and keep an eye out for any team fights. In the early game though, it's not necessarily recommended that you rotate the fights unless they're happening anywhere on the jungle side closest to you. If they're mid lane or farther, they're probably not worth rotating to, as you most likely won't get there in time. So with part 4, I want to talk about exactly what your first laning cycle should be until you back for the first time, as well as a few general things you should be doing as the support throughout the game in order to best help your team. Straight off the bat, when you spawn, again I'm going to cover the crest in the itemization section, but you're going to want to make sure you start off with either the Guardian Crest or the Consort Crest as your starter every time. This is essential because these crests are specifically balanced around the support role, and they'll give you an extra passive gold drip to help keep you from falling behind, since you're very rarely supposed to be taking last hits. Then, when you enter lane, don't place your first ward right away. Wait until the first few seconds after the minions spawn, or you could even wait until they get into lane. Since the wards have a limited timer, if you place them too early, you'll have wasted a lot of time that it could have been active for, since you'll have to wait until the next ward charge comes back up to place another. Once the lane minions start fighting, it's game on to start setting up for the first gold buff, which is going to spawn right here, and is supposed to be secured by your carry to help them get ahead more. I would highly recommend poking at least one of your opponents, but ideally both, out of lane before attempting to take the gold buff. Otherwise, the enemy is highly likely to contest it and potentially steal it. You should be working with your carry to try and open up opportunities to deal damage. A general rule of thumb to help with these engagements easier is if you're a ranged support hero, stay about a foot behind your carry and directly next to them if you're a melee support. This will make it easier to counter any poking attempts by their duo, as well as being quicker to use your utility items to help boost your carry depending what hero you're playing. Moving on to the mid game, you should start quickly rotating out of lane, but only to place wards on Fangtooth in your near side jungle, and then head right back to the lane so you don't lose out on too much farm. This is especially important if they have somebody like Chimera or Rampage who can solo Fangtooth if people aren't paying attention. And again, keep an eye out for any teamfights happening within half the map of you. Then finally, during the late game, you should be mostly grouped up as a team and following them around, but still keeping the closest eye on your carry, because they're going to be target number 1 for any good team. In part 5, I want to go over the support heroes, as well as a solid starter build with each one, so you can pick them up and hit the ground running. Quickly before that though, I want to go over the crests, as there's been a small shakeup in the meta for them post 0.18, and I want to make sure newer players know how important they are. If you are a new player and not well versed in the item meta, I'd highly recommend just rolling with the suggested build the game's going to give you based off the hero and role you picked. But going back to the crests, generally speaking, the Consort Crest is going to be better for the ranged heroes, and the Guardian for melee heroes. But by all means, use either one you think would work better. For the Consort Crest, every 30 seconds you'll get a charge of something, I don't know, but on attacking a lane minion or opposing hero, you'll gain 20 gold in exchange for the stack. You can hold up to 3 stacks at one time. An important thing to note is the stacks are only going to activate if you're within roughly an auto attack range of another friendly hero. This is on top of the additional passive gold drip, allowing you to keep up on farm. After gaining 240 gold from actively consuming your stacks, it's going to evolve into the Keeper Crest, which will retain all previous passives but give you a nice boost in health and mana regen. Once you gain 240 more gold using that crest, you'll be able to upgrade it into its evolved state upon returning to the fountain. Then, there's going to be 3 options to pick from under the evolved crests. These are Tranquility, which is going to heal both you and nearby allies for a relatively small amount, but it's also going to grant 10% damage mitigation to them for 2 seconds. Very solid all-around pick if you just want something pretty straightforward. Then we have Silentium, which will silence an enemy hero for 1.5 seconds. This is a very underutilized item in my opinion, especially after 0.18. It's specifically made to counter heroes with longer lasting channeled ultimates. A few examples of these would be Gideon, Narbash, Argus, Iggy, Twin Blast, Howitzer, Sparrow, and Kira. So a pretty extensive list of heroes whose ultimate you could completely negate if you're close enough to use your crest on them. If you didn't know, a silence is a form of CC most commonly seen on Richter's Whiplash or Drongo's Grenade. Basically, it's going to cancel whatever ability you're currently using and prevent you from using any other abilities for that duration. So overall, very solid crest if you're facing one or more of these heroes. All you have to do is activate the crest and use it on the hero you want to silence. Ideally, the sooner after they use their ultimate, the better. Finally, for the consort crest line, we have Reclamation, which is going to cleanse both yourself and the nearby allies. Personally, I find this one to be pretty lackluster because while helpful, the other ones are simply more useful. Basically, a cleanse will remove any debuffs from things like item damage over time, Grux's Bleed, Morgish's Mark, Shinbi's Ultimate, Kira's Q, Sereth's Fire, and Wraith's Ultimate. Again, this can be helpful, but odds are you're going to make more of an impact with the others. Moving on to the Guardian Crests. This one works the exact same way as the Consort Crest in gaining gold stacks and expending them by attacking enemies. It will also upgrade the same way by gaining a total of 480 gold. The 3 evolved crest options for this are Sanctification, which will grant yourself and nearby allies a pretty hefty shield, being a bit more potent than the Consort Crest's healing. This is another great, straightforward item that'll help keep your team and yourself alive during team fights. Next one we have is Rift Walkers, which in my opinion is only good on either Richter or Steel because it's going to make you dash a small distance and do the Giga Suck to all enemies in a small radius in front of you, allowing you to follow up with either a Shield Slam or Richter ult. Besides them, I don't find it personally useful on anyone else though. Lastly, for the Guardian's Crest, we have Leaf Song, which will grant yourself and nearby allies increased movement speed for 4 seconds, as well as becoming immune to slows and allowing them to pass through enemies. This is good on a few heroes, but most notably Narbash when stacked with his abilities movement speed.
Fuck, boy.
This will also help prevent body blocking if the enemy has a bunch of super thick boys like Steel, Narbash, Rampage, Richter, and etc. I was going to go over each specific support item in this video as well in case newbies are unfamiliar with the new items, but I don't want to make a video too long, but if that's something you'd like me to do, just let me know. I made a chart similar to my jungle guide and ranked each hero from 1 to 5 stars in these categories. Utility, or how well they can buff your allies, tankiness, poking potential, protection potential, or how easy it is to directly keep your carry alive, and their overall subjective score and how happy I'd be to have one on my team. We're going to start out with Muriel, who's a very solid pick most of the time. While she doesn't bring a whole lot of tankiness to fights, she has a ton of utility with her kit. Being able to instantly give your teammates hundreds of temporary HP is invaluable in most team fights, and I've had countless engagements that could have been lost had I not come in clutch with the last second shield to keep my teammate alive. She also has lots of poke potential with her long range Q ability and empowered basic attacks with the passive. As well as a global, life-saving ultimate, makes Muriel one of the best supports in the game, hands down, but requires a decent amount of practice. The typical Muriel player should be poking the enemy early and being a nuisance while making sure to keep your shields and movement speed boosts ready for your carry if they need them, and once you get your ultimate, keep an eye out across the map for any teammates who need it. Below her, we have good old Lieutenant Bellica, who in my personal opinion isn't really suited towards a support and should mostly be left as a mid laner. She does bring a little utility with her mana drone, but besides that, she's mostly just centered around doing damage, which she is great at, but even her ultimate is basically just a kill secure, which is the opposite of what you want to be doing as a support. So for that reason alone, I think she's personally the worst support. If you are interested in playing her as a support though, typically you'll want to use your stun defensively and try and predict place your Void Bomb to poke the enemy's early game, as well as placing your mana drone in hard to reach places to maximize its mana drain. And then try and only use her ultimate to deal extra damage, or if there's a low chance another teammate's gonna secure the kill. Moving on to the next slide, we're starting out with my boy Thicky Ricky, who I'm gonna be straight up. Facing a good Richter is going to be the most terrifying and enraging thing that you're ever going to experience in this game. With his ability to dictate when, where, why, and how fights happen, pretty much all you can do is sit there and hope bro gives you mercy, or at minimum, stay halfway across the lane from him without the rest of your team ready and willing to deal with any potential consequences. As a Richter support, your hook is going to be your bread and butter. By using and abusing his patented hook, electric field, ultimate, whiplash combo, any poor soul unfortunate enough to be caught up in Buddy's infinite stunlock will be sure to think about their decisions on their one-way journey back to Fountain. Overall, Richter is a very solid S-tier support, but only if you land at least 50% of your hooks, as it may be the single hardest ability to land consistently in the entire game. Next up, we have Narbash, who's another very solid all-around pick, especially in the utility category, boasting the best healing ability in the game, as well as providing a large movement speed boost to yourself, allies, and minions. His ultimate is great as well, especially when paired with True Silver Bracelet, but it's relatively easy to disrupt, so it takes a considerable amount of thought and strategy to use it effectively, but very good all-around kit. As a Narbash, you'll mostly be playing passive as you deal next to no damage, and should prioritize body blocking and using your stun defensively or in retaliation, as well as outputting extreme amounts of sexual healing. Moving on, we have Decker, who, in my biased opinion, when combined with the below build, is the single most fun you can have with the hero in this game. In fact, I can sum up the entire Decker experience with a single clip. Enough said. But for real, she may have one of, if not the highest skill ceilings for a support, but for me, once I got the hang of her, I literally just find it hard to play any other support, simply because Decker's so much fun to play. Using a combination of Galaxy Greaves and her passive double jump, a cage, and a stun makes her nearly unkillable and an expert distraction in teamfights. You can also navigate nearly any verticality shortcut in the game, making her easily the most mobile support. As a Decker, you'll mostly be using your Q laser ability to poke and bait the enemy abilities, then use your double jump to avoid them. Then use your stun ball plus laser follow-up to retaliate, and occasionally dump your ult on them for extra burst damage. One last thing is use the cage strategically, as it doesn't have much range or last very long, so it's mostly used to hold up an advancing jungler or carry from chasing you or your carry. Overall, S tier support, highly recommend. Moving on, we have FaZe, who I have conflicted feelings about. I know a certain someone who's going to have some very strong words for me after hearing this, but I find FaZe to be one of the least overall impactful supports. Don't get me wrong, she does bring a lot of great things to games, and I do think she's better than Belica, but frankly, the blind ability has never hindered me from mopping the floor with their carry. The laser beam is arguably her best ability, but even that takes like a second and a half to actually stun them, and her tether seems to be a tad bit too short to be super effective, as well as her ult being nearly useless when combined with somebody like Revenant. Again though, I don't want to bash her because she certainly can be potent, especially with the healing passive ability. I just think she needs a small buff to compete with the other support options a little bit better. FaZe is easily my least played support, because every time I do, bad things happen. So take my advice with a grain of salt, but typically most good phases I've encountered play like this. You'll typically want to maintain a tether with your carry at all times, and sit just inside its max range, behind and to the far side lane. I see a lot of phases use their beam consistently on the minion waves as well, and I don't think it's useful enough to justify using it on the minions because it has such a long cooldown and overall lackluster damage. The trade-off doesn't seem to be worth it, so try and keep it for better use cases. An exception to this rule would be if your carry is lower health, then you can kind of spam your abilities to proc the passive healing for yourself and your carry. Overall, she's okay, and I hope I don't get kicked out of the Discord for saying this. Forgive me, Fike. Then lastly, use her ultimate whenever it seems like shit's about to hit the fan, or to secure towers and objectives faster. Moving on to the last slide, we have Steel, who's another overall great support pick if you need a tank with some CC. He's arguably the king of CC next to Aurora and Richter. Having the potential to completely stunlock their entire team for 4 to 5 seconds tells you everything you need to know about Steel, and combined with a good carry, Steel's another great support to engage and provide peel with. As a Steel support, you'll want to play pretty passively until you get your ultimate, unless an opportunity presents itself for a strong retaliation. Use your shield to block high impact abilities like a Revenant Q or Phase Beam. Next up, we have Argus, who shouldn't be on this list. I'm just putting him here to quickly tell everyone to stop picking him as a support. He's not a support anymore. He never was supposed to be in the first place, so stop picking him just because he's a stun. He's not a good support and I'll die on that hill. This should just about cover most of the essentials of being a support. If I missed anything or didn't cover a topic well enough, just let me know in the comments and I'd be happy to answer any questions. This video is coming out a lot later than I wanted it to. Hopefully no one noticed, but if you did, I don't plan on making it a habit. I started incorporating things like After Effects and Adobe Audition to hone my editing skills a little bit more. So these were literally my first creations with these programs, and any feedback is much appreciated and goes towards helping me make better content in the future. If you watch this long, you're a real one, and I seriously appreciate you. If you want to watch me play live, I stream on YouTube and Twitch Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, starting at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard. I'd love to chat with you over there as well. Thanks again to everyone, and good luck on the battlefield.